member from Regina Capel.
The Prime Minister is causing division and anger in unprecedented ways with a backlash that we may never have seen in this country before. 133 First Nations suing this Prime Minister over the carbon tax. Several provinces taking the Prime Minister to court to try to stop the tax. One province refusing to collect the tax altogether. And now the Premier of the Northwest Territories asking for a full exemption, saying, quote, the prices are just getting higher and higher here. After 8 years, it's clear the Prime Minister's not worth the cost. Will he put his ego aside and axe the tax?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, last week when the Conservatives had the chance to stand up for First Nations people, they voted against the measures that Indigenous communities need every single day to deliver things like clean water, Mr. Speaker, to deliver things like education, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that infrastructure is kept running and maintained, Mr. Speaker. When they had a chance to stand up with First Nations, what did they do? They voted against them.
The Honourable Member from Regina Capel.
When they have a chance to provide relief to all Canadians and First Nations, they say, we'll see you in court, Mr. Speaker. They have succeeded, though, in uniting Canadians around one thing: their hatred for the carbon tax. As hardworking Canadians across the country visit food banks for the first time or turn their thermostats down, Northerners are really facing the sting of the carbon tax. The Premier of the Northwest Territories went on to say, quote, I mean, ideally, a complete exemption for the territory is what we would hope for because, like I said before, the costs are already high. Why won't the Prime Minister have some mercy on Canadians and axe the tax?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
I think it's important that the honourable member stop misleading Canadians. Research coming out of the University of Calgary last week shows that their plan to make pollution free again will only benefit those earning over $250,000 a year and hurt almost everybody else. The Conservative leader says that he cares about affordability, but last week in the middle of the night they voted to cut affordable housing construction, cut school food programs, cut dental care for the most vulnerable, cut affordable child care. Shame, shame, shame.
The Honourable Member from Prince George Peace River, Northern Rockies.
In one of his first comments as Northwest Territories Premier, R.J. Simpson simply said yesterday a carbon tax doesn't work for Northwest Territories. And a complete exemption for the territories is what we would hope for because, like I said before, the costs are already high. Higher costs are not the solution up here. Will the Prime Minister do the right thing this Christmas, fire this Environment Minister, and axe the carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister.
Wildfires have ravaged our country. In the Northwest Territories, towns were almost burnt down. We had to evacuate the capital city of the Northwest Territories, Mr. Speaker. And what did the Conservatives do? They voted against the measures to fight against climate change, and they voted against the measures to support Canadians at their time of need as well. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Prince George Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Do it again, Bob.
Mr. Speaker, that answer throws the current Premier of the Northwest Territories completely under the bus. He unfairly gives a tax exemption to certain Canadians and not others. His Environment Minister has doubled down recently and said, you know, I'm going to give that exemption to some but not others. Liberal hot air won't keep Northwest Territory residents warm this Christmas. Will the minister come to me, to the Northwest Territories, sit across from families in Northwest Territories and tell them why they won't exempt them from the carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, climate change is having a devastating effect on northern communities, with the north warming 3 times the rate as that of the south. We've seen some of the most devastating effects of climate change this last summer with horrible wildfires all over Northwest Territories. Our government is focused on making ends meet for Northerners while at the same time battling climate change, while at the same time making sure that Northerners have what they need to live a good life.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-d'Érable. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister of the Northern Territories wants to know why provinces that voted Liberal got a tax break, whereas the Northwest Territories have to pay, even though, according to the new Premier, prices are just going up and up. With these rising prices, Canadian families are going to have to choose between having a Christmas meal and heating their homes. When will this Prime Minister finally axe the tax on farmers and families? The Honourable Minister of Transport. Mr. Speaker, if I were a Quebec Conservative colleague, I would be ashamed to rise this morning. They voted against Quebec's dairy producers. They voted against funding for the Plains of Abraham. They voted against funding for the Magdalen Islands. They insulted Quebecers. I would be ashamed, very ashamed, to rise this morning. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Well, Mr. Speaker, in a few days it'll be Christmas. If I were a member of the Liberal cabinet, you know it would make me very, very ashamed? It would make me very ashamed to know that a child who on their Christmas list to know that some children ask for a gift card in their list to Santa because that's what they want, to be able to eat a square meal at Christmas. That's embarrassing. That's shameful. When will the Liberals understand that their plan isn't working, that they just want to quadruple the carbon tax, which will make the situation worse for all Canadians and Quebecers, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister, Mr. Speaker, this is a shocking claim when we know that the Conservatives are just trying to change the subject so they don't have to talk about what they did last week. It's shameful, and in fact, it's a betrayal towards Canadians. The fact that they voted against our measures, against food banks, against housing and women's shelters, against Ukraine, Mr. Speaker. Who's telling them what to do? I mean, their leader just seems to be taking direction from Donald Trump in the U.S., Mr. Speaker. The